It was also a unique experience for Mike McCready, who, in addition to stepping up and being one of the primary songwriters for the band, was also the only guitar player in the group. Mike was far more used to working with one or two other guitarists. He had never really been the lone guy before. Yet despite this, there wouldn't be a lot of overdubs, as the album was largely recorded live in the studio. Now, while McCready would take the lead in writing the music, with everyone really having an opportunity to add their own input, both McCready and Barrett agree that vocalist Lane Staley is the one who really shaped the bluesy music they were coming up with into something unique with his lyrics. You see, the idea from the very beginning was to just give him full creative reign, as he was such a great singer and songwriter that they fully trusted him to come up with something great. In fact, according to McCready, quote, "I didn't have any rules or anything. I just wanted him to be free to create what he felt, and I think he felt some freedom in that and he went for it." Barrett Martin believes that, quote, "Mad Season was like a spiritual mission for Lane. He was looking around a bunch of books around that time, and I remember one time when I saw him reading The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. That's a common book about spirituality. He was reading it when we were in rehearsal and in the studio. I believe he was drawing on some deep insights and introspections that he had." These books and the spiritual motivation can be seen most clearly in the track that would be the first single off the album, River of Deceit, a song that was jointly built off a riff that McCready had laying around for some time but had never really felt confident enough to bring it into Pearl Jam, and a poem that Lane had reportedly penned before even hearing the music. A song that definitely feels inspired by Lane's investigations into spiritualism, a feeling that is only highlighted by the vibes and viola that Barrett added to the mix, giving the song this almost ethereal quality. A quality that is very much a part of the Mad Season sound, as Barrett Martin would describe the album, quote, "Half the songs on the album were kind of quiet and atmospheric and very haunting, and then the other half are just very sonically heavy and loud and powerful." Wake Up, River of Deceit, Long Gone Day, and All Alone definitely all fall into that laid-back, haunting, atmospheric vein, while songs like Lifeless Dead and I Don't Know Anything definitely lay in a heavier, more in-your-face range, and songs like X-Ray Mind and I'm Above kind of straddle that line. That all being said, while there is some inspiration from spirituality, the dominating theme of the album again sadly seems to revolve around Lane and his addiction to heroin. The two, though, are not mutually exclusive by any means. In fact, according to Mike McCready, quote, "I think they're him searching for a way to get out of the spiral he was in, or documenting it, documenting the pain and the suffering he was feeling, knowing that he couldn't get out of it, the horror that goes along with it." Which I think some people miss when listening to Lane's lyrics. I remember years ago reading something characterizing Alice in Chains' heroin rock in what felt like a dismissive, critical way, as if suggesting they were glamorizing the drug, when the reality was the exact opposite. Between really digging into Dirt and this album, it's become obvious that Lane always seemed to have been very upfront with his struggles. I now look at Dirt as partially being his way of tracing the path of an addict, with Junkhead being about the early life of a junkie and not being all that bad, but from there it's just this descending spiral until you get to Angry Chair, which seems to be about going through rehab, and finally ending with Wood, which is about the overdose death of one of their friends, Andy Wood. You then again see Lane struggling with and recognizing his addiction throughout this album as well. Wake Up very much reads like a wake-up call to someone trying to escape a decade-long addiction, while the line "so an infection, not a phase" seems to be acknowledging that addiction is more of a disease than a habit that you can simply control. An idea that he revisits in Artificial Red, as Lane talks about spending his days in recovery from a fatal disease. As the way I understand it, the attitude has to be you're never cured, you're always in recovery. Artificial Red notably features a call and response type exchange between the music and Lane's vocals that Mike McCready credits to Baker. Vocals that also feature a line about a pink cloud turning gray, which upon first hearing the album I had just assumed was some imagery that Lane liked, seeing as how he had also used it in the Alice in Chains song Angry Chair. Now, though, it feels fairly apparent that it was a phrase he had picked up while in rehab, a concept that, as I explained in my episode on the album Dirt, had first been created by Alcoholics Anonymous, before being picked up by its offshoot Narcotics Anonymous as a way of describing the early honeymoon-like phase of sobriety, a time when everything clears up and you feel good. This initial feeling of bliss, though, for most doesn't seem to last. As a result, this pink cloud kind of gives the recovering addict a kind of false hope that leads to disappointment and potential relapse, hence the whole turning gray thing. The most haunting line on the album, though, might just come from the first track, Wake Up, when Lane notes how slow suicide is no way to go, as in retrospect it seems to very clearly indicate that he understood the path he was on and the dangers inherent in it. Yet, even with that understanding, Lane ultimately could not break free, which I think is what makes Lane Staley such a tragic figure, as it's not like he did not know what he was doing and how dangerous it was. He was in no way oblivious to his addiction or its risks, yet there just seemed to be nothing he could do about it. A fate he very much seemed to blame himself for, as in River of Deceit, he would note that his pain was self-chosen. It's a very melancholic album then, yet at the same time there is quite a bit of beauty there. For example, on I'm Above, Lane is joined by his friend Mark Lanegan, the singer of Screaming Trees. The two then harmonize throughout the song's verses much like you would expect from an Alice in Chains song. The final result, however, does not sound like a song from Lane's main band due to how different Lanegan's voice is. In fact, he helps to give the song more of a Screaming Trees vibe, while still overall being pretty bluesy in nature, especially with its opening riff. In contrast, I Don't Know Anything is the most Alice in Chains feeling song on the album, which makes sense as Lane brought in the primary riff for the song much like he did for tracks like Angry Chair in his main group. I Don't Know Anything then is seemingly about feeling lost and not understanding why the world can't just be a better, more caring place. The song also seems to hint at resorting to using drugs as a way of dealing with that, with the line about hiding reliever in Trails of Blood, which feels like a reference to shooting up heroin, just as the tiny marks that buy and trade men's souls that he references in X-Ray Mind are an allusion to needle marks. Then there's Lifeless Dead, a heavy track both musically and in terms of subject matter. The main riff of the song was, according to Mike McCready, heavily inspired by Led Zeppelin. Mike, in fact, admits to really leaning into his Jimmy Page influence on this track, as he went so far as to use a double-neck Gibson SG to record it, which, if you're not aware, is the type of guitar Page had constructed so he could perform Stairway to Heaven in a live setting. As for why I said the subject matter is heavy, well, that is because the song very much seems to be about Lane's relationship with Demi Perrott. The two had, from all accounts, been deeply in love. She had been a kind of muse for him, inspiring his art. In fact, the cover image of the album is actually a piece Lane had made using a picture of himself and Demry as a reference. They had even at one point started making plans to get married, which included him buying Demry an engagement ring and her picking out a dress. Reportedly, Sean Kinney was even supposed to be Lane's best man at the wedding. However, with both of them getting hooked on heroin and who knows what else happening in their lives as a result of Lane's sudden fame, the couple split. The song then very much documents Lane's heartbreak over this turn of events, while at the same time it also feels like the passage about a demon coming to him, declaring that he's going to win, is Lane recognizing that it was only a matter of time before one or both of them would die due to their addiction. Rounding out the rest of the album is the standout song Long Gone Day, where Lane is again joined by his close friend Screaming Trees vocalist Mark Lanegan. It's this very cool, laid-back, jazzy kind of song that features some great interplay between these two amazing vocalists and their distinct voices. Lyrically, it's a song reminiscing about past days when everyone was close, a fairly universal concept, but it's likely specifically about them and their friends in the Seattle music scene, who one day were all just hanging around in the city making music together until the winds of fame and fortune blew them all over the globe. That being said, it also very much feels like it's another song about Lane struggling with his addiction, as he recognizes that he's lost and how that has cost him relationships with these people he used to be so close to. Specifically, it seems like when he's asking a woman to come on down, he's speaking to his lost love, Demry. The album then ends with a pair of largely instrumental tracks, November Hotel and All Alone, with November Hotel getting its name from Mike McCready's father call letters from when he was flying an F-4 Phantom over Vietnam. Overall, Above does not feel like an overly composed or complex record. In many ways, then, it sounds exactly like what it is, a bunch of friends coming together and more or less spontaneously jamming and making music together. Music that a relatively small number of people in the Seattle area got to hear being crafted into songs during the band's 6 or so outings in small venues like the Crocodile and the Moor. The larger public then would get its first preview of the band and its music on the 8th of January 1995 during Pearl Jam's South Pollution satellite radio broadcast, which was a 4.5-hour show broadcast live via satellite with the express purpose that any radio station with a satellite receiver could pick up the show and rebroadcast it, while also being able to be picked up by virtually anyone possessing a shortwave radio. The idea for the self-pollution broadcast actually had its genesis a year earlier when Pearl Jam was performing in Atlanta on Easter Sunday. You see, during that performance, they had purchased satellite time to make their concert available to any radio station that wanted to carry it. Then, following the show, Eddie Vedder got to play DJ for an hour as he played some of his favorite records for whoever was listening, an experience that was so much fun they decided they wanted to do it again, this time involving some of their friends from Seattle. The show then was broadcast out of a dilapidated Seattle area home primarily used by local bands as a rehearsal space and a trailer that had been parked in the yard. Eddie Vedder, who was guiding this whole project, would play selected records from the trailer while a who's who of local musicians gathered in the house to perform over the course of the broadcast, which included live sets from Soundgarden, Mudhoney, and of course Pearl Jam. The show also featured a spoken word piece by Nirvana bassist Chris Novoselic, as well as a preview of Mad Season's upcoming album as they played Lifeless Dead and I Don't Know Anything, and a preview of Dave Grohl's upcoming solo album that would bear the little remembered name of Foo Fighters. In all, the show was said to have had a fun, relaxed atmosphere more akin to a party than a professional radio show, with the most stress reportedly involving Vedder having to run from the house to the trailer when he needed to start the next record. As for Mad Season's album Above, it would be released in March 1995 and would quickly go gold thanks in part to its hit single River of the Sea, which landed in the top 10 in the US. The record label Columbia then were very excited and wanted the group to record another album, something that everybody seemed to be on board for, eventually, as in the meantime, they all had other commitments to take care of. Lane, you see, would return to Alice in Chains to record their third and final album with him. Pearl Jam too had to get back to work, while Baker joined the Walkabouts and Screaming Trees recorded and toured in support of their excellent album Dust. When all was said and done, though, they very much looked to make another Mad Season album. In fact, McCready, Barrett, and Baker all got back together in the studio in 1996, and in just a single session they managed to lay down 17 tracks. They were so prolific, in fact, that when talking with Columbia, Barrett let them know that their second album, which they were planning to call Disinformation, might ultimately be a double album. Unfortunately, by this time, Lane was really struggling with his addiction, and as a result his health had taken a serious downturn. In fact, he was in such a bad way he was unable to attend any of their sessions. Now, apparently, the rest of Mad Season had briefly brought Mark Lanegan down to the studio to see if he wanted to step in, as Lane's plan for the second album had been that Mark would be more involved in co-writing the album with him, but Mark apparently wasn't ready to sing on anything at the time either. So, despite the great chemistry they all had, which made songwriting easy and fun, Mad Season would be put on the shelf after just a single album. Now, the hope always was that eventually they would get back together again, but that sadly was not meant to be. According to Mike McCready, quote, "Getting clean and sober and trying to get my buddies to do the same was the initial response of what I wanted the band to be. But that was super naive. You can't get clean unless you really want to individually." Indeed, within 10 years of its formation, half the members of Mad Season were dead. John Baker Sanders would die first from a heroin overdose on the 15th of January 1999, a death which was a massive shock to Barrett Martin in particular, who had lived just a few blocks away from Baker. Indeed, according to Martin, Baker came over to visit and hang out just about every morning. The two friends had actually spoken the night of Baker's death, and even made plans to meet up at a local diner for breakfast the following morning. As for Lane Staley, he would pass just 3 years later on the 5th of April 2002, after overdosing on a combination of heroin and cocaine. Losses that would leave Mike McCready wondering, quote, "What it would be like if they had grown up a bit like I did. I wish I could just sit around and laugh with them again because Baker was super funny and Lane was a guy who never had a bad word to say about anybody," which was apparently a fairly rare thing among the Seattle musicians, who McCready characterized as being a bunch of passive-aggressive bitchy complainers. Lane, though, was unique as he was, quote, "really fun and he never had anything negative to say." The thing about Lane's death, though, while it was tragic to all who knew him, it was also sadly not entirely unexpected, as Lane had seemingly died from both his addiction and from what some suspect was his inability to get over Demry's death. You see, Demry had died in 1996 from her own heroin addiction, which is reportedly about the time when Lane became very reclusive. He seemingly then blamed himself for getting her hooked on heroin in the first place. In fact, a teddy bear belonging to Demery that he had asked her mom for following her death would be found in Lane's apartment after his overdose. As for Mad Season following these deaths, all thoughts of doing anything with it vanished. The band that had showed so much promise only produced one album and performed 6 times live. In fact, just thinking about the group and listening to its music was painful to the two surviving members, as it brought up memories of their lost friends.